One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Ariel Pesante. Ariel is the Associate Athletics Director for Governance and Compliance at University of Massachusetts. Greetings, Ariel. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be on.
Now, you've been in college athletics for roughly a decade. You've worked your way through compliance. You've worked in some budgeting things and actually have served on a number of committees in that decade, or almost a decade that you've been in college athletics. Now you find yourself at Massachusetts, and in addition to governance and compliance, you also have sport supervision over men's basketball, football, and baseball. Of course, men's basketball and football are two of the most visible sports on campus there at UMass. And I wonder, how do you balance the responsibilities of compliance governance with sport supervision over men's basketball and football?
Well, firstly, I think that's a great question. For me, anytime I'm thinking about balancing responsibilities, I really think back to my first full-time job in collegiate athletics. My first time on campus, I was the sole compliance administrator at Manhattan College, and it really taught me how to prioritize tasks that I had to accomplish. It was a bit of baptism by fire, but it was a great experience in teaching me to make sure you're accomplishing your main objectives, and then once those things are squared away, you can then venture out and gain some more responsibilities. In terms of, the compliance area, it is paramount to a university, right? So in my mind, my first objective, as I stated, is to protect the integrity of the institution. If we're not doing that, then the sport oversight ceases to exist, right? So the first thing we want to do is protect the integrity of the institution. And then as we transition into sport oversight, I really have great relationships with our coaches and spend a lot of time having open, honest, direct conversations as it relates to compliance. So in my mind, it's really a smooth transition into the sport oversight role where you're doing a lot of those things just on a variety of topics. And then the last thing really is that we have a great support system at UMass. So our director of athletics, Ryan Bamford, does a great job guiding me through the challenges of being a sport administrator of two really visible programs, and has assisted me, and I've leaned on him a lot in the past 2 years.
Well, you talked about prioritizing priorities, right? You learned in your first job there at Manhattan College. Of course, you have to do that now and protecting the integrity of the institution. But now when you're talking to the baseball coach, the men's basketball coach, the football coach, obviously compliance is important, but you are the sports administrator for their sport. And learning how to balance that had to be a learning curve.
Absolutely. My first year at UMass, I didn't have football and men's basketball right away. I had oversight of our men's soccer and women's soccer programs, and we had some staff reorganization, and I was fortunate enough to gain those responsibilities. But I think the thought process was that I had really good relationships with our coaches, and they knew that I was invested in protecting the institution, but that ultimately I was trying to serve as a resource for them and their programs. And if you have great relationships with your coaches, you can have that transition happen relatively smoothly. There's been growing pains without, I wouldn't say that it was automatically something that worked out to be perfect, but, leaning on Ryan has been really helpful for me because he's seen it and he's done it, and taking advice from him has helped me to balance those responsibilities.
That has to be for him, right? Over football and basketball, and being the compliance person, that there's a level of comfortability there, knowing that you won't compromise what is the number one priority, right? Integrity of the institution. For a basketball or football coach who may want something, and for the football and basketball coach and baseball coach, like, they know that you're going to do what you can to figure out where you can make a no a yes, if it can be a yes, or if it has to stay no, at least you'll understand when you're explaining it to them. I think there's benefits to the whole thing, and people must see it as an asset, right? Those relationships you talked about.
Absolutely. I think, we set the foundation in our compliance office and taking in questions or concerns that coaches have and trying to find a route or trying to find a solution. And I take that same attitude into my sport oversight responsibilities. And because coaches know that we do that from a compliance perspective, when we have to have those same kinds of discussions as it relates to sport oversight or decisions that, come about as a result of sport oversight, coaches know that you're trying to do what's in the best interest of their program. And if you can't get directly from A to B, you're going to find a way to get them some kind of solution. So maybe A to B isn't possible, but C is. And I think our coaches really appreciate that.
Now, I'll ask one more thing about this prioritizing priorities thing. Of course, that's how I term it, right? But you talked about you learned that right off the bat in your first job there at Manhattan College. From talking to athletic directors, that's something that they really have to hone in on when they get into a leadership role, right? Is that prioritizing priorities. If you're debating two things that are both top priority, what is your decision-making process? I mean, how do you come to conclusions for what you have to come to conclusions for in your role?
Sure. So first, the thought is, are any of these issues time-sensitive in nature, or are they simply high-profile items that need to be addressed? If neither of them are time-sensitive in nature, I think it's really important to set the expectation. Speak with the coaches, whether it's a compliance issue or a sport oversight issue, and say, hey, understand that we have this issue on our hands. We are going to work on this and try and get your answer as diligently as possible. And once coaches know that you've communicated and you're invested in solving the problem, they are usually reasonable.
So that brings me to my next question here. You talk about evaluating coaches throughout the year in your role as sports supervision, but then also evaluating yourself in this role. You're, 2 years now. And like you said, after a year, your role changed. Now you're supervising two of the most visible sports. What is your evaluation process for yourself? And then tell me about evaluating coaches. That's a whole different aspect of leadership, right? Evaluating other people.
In terms of evaluating myself and my effectiveness and efficiency in my role, I really think the bedrock of working in collegiate athletics is relationships and communication, right? So in my mind, it's really a continuous evaluation. I'm having these discussions with our director of athletics continually, and he's providing me with feedback, and I'm looking to make those changes in real time to ensure that I'm meeting the expectation that he has set. In terms of evaluating coaches, that is one of the areas that I think I've had the greatest learning curve. We went from overseeing men's and women's soccer, and we had a coaching change, and was fortunate enough to lead that search and had to make decisions along with Ryan as to why we were going to make those changes. And he allows me to provide feedback. Ultimately, the director of athletics makes those decisions, but he allows me to provide feedback on what I think and how I think we've gotten here. So, that was a really good learning experience on a smaller scale. We subsequently made a coaching change in our football program, and Ryan was equally as open to any feedback that I was going to provide to him. So really leaning on him in those areas, because that's something that I haven't done in the past, has been crucial to my growth.
And you mentioned for yourself, right, an ongoing evaluation process. Is the same thing with the coaches, the relationships, or are you always communicating with them, always, hey, this is what I see, or this is where we're going? Tell me about that process, the constant communication throughout the academic year and athletic year. One
of the biggest things I learned, especially working with our football program, is that presence and time is really important. So in order to build relationships, I have to be down at our football performance center. I have to be at practice. I have to check in with our coaches and see how they're doing. And once you're able to build that foundational relationship, then having those additional conversations about performance or things we may need to do differently becomes a lot easier. I think doing that at the outset of this, I was, looking at the responsibilities and the things that I thought we could do better, but I didn't have really great relationships foundationally. So building that and investing time has allowed for the feedback to be received in a different manner.
So is intrinsically and also externally with the people you supervise, is the annual review still a thing, or is that a dinosaur that doesn't happen anymore?
We still participate as a public institution. We still participate in a pretty formal annual review process. With that being said, I really think that's important that we are giving continual feedback throughout the year, so that by the time you get to the annual review, there aren't any surprises. You should be aware of how you've performed throughout the year, and you should have received feedback that will allow you to make some changes. So while we do go through a formal review process, to me, it's really paramount to try and communicate, whether that be with your staff or your coaches, on things that you think any areas for improvement that there may be, or areas for growth. And similarly, I think it's important to speak on things that are going really well. with the new coaching staff in our football program, there are things that they've implemented that have been awesome. And we have to applaud those things. So same way we've talked about things we can change, we've talked about things that we do really well as well.
Right. So the annual review is really just a summary, I guess, of everything you talked about throughout the year, maybe.
Absolutely. Ultimately, it's a summation of the discussions that you've had, whether that be on a weekly or monthly basis. The annual review will serve as a compilation of those conversations, really.
I'll ask one final question here to wrap. You mentioned that you gave input in some coaching changes and some hires there in athletics with Ryan, specifically football. What was the process there? I mean, did he come and ask you to get you some candidates, or was he just asking you about the program? Tell me what your input was in terms of hiring a new football coach there in Massachusetts.
Well, ultimately, the candidates and the people that Ryan had interest in were created, that was a list that he had and things that he explored. I think he really counted on me to give him my thoughts on the day-to-day operation of the football program. I spent a lot of time down at our football performance center and getting to know our student athletes and getting to know our coaching staff. And we meet on a weekly basis to review things that are going on in our football program. I ultimately think he took that feedback and it led him to make the decision that he made.
Right. And so this is based on your evaluation throughout the year, and you're telling me, hey, here are some of the things I think in terms of the program, what we probably need to adjust. Here are some things that went well. And so he took that information, right?
Absolutely. He's just really open to feedback. Ryan and I have a really good relationship where I can speak to him candidly, and he is open to the things that I'm going to present. And he'll similarly tell me if he thinks I've looked at something in the wrong way, and I really appreciate that. So, like I said, we meet on a weekly basis, and I'm able to provide him what my thoughts are and what I'm seeing, being kind of the feet on the ground in terms of our football program. And he's able to internalize that feedback and ultimately make a decision. I wouldn't say that, my feedback was the sole impetus. I don't think that at all. I think Ryan had his own thoughts and his own evaluation, as any director of athletics would. But I'm really appreciative that I'm able to speak freely, and he does take into account the feedback that I do provide.
Right. Your feedback is heard and potentially useful. That makes for an excellent working relationship. Well, Ariel, I think this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
That was Ariel Pesante. He is the Associate Athletics Director for Governance and Compliance at the University of Massachusetts. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.